Okay, so next we're going to be making an iPhone that's going to be a little bit interactable. So you're going to be able to actually click on some of the apps and then it can maybe take you to a different part of the website or do something, that you want to. Now, initially I was going to use the table code for this, but instead I thought maybe we should be able to actually use the div tags or new tags called grid. So today we're going to use div tags, and that way you can see how you can actually use div tags to compartmentalize your website. So you can put things on the left, and you can put things on the right, and you can have different areas within a small space, or even a larger space like the entire whole website. So there's heaps of tutorials out there for div tags, but we're going to jump straight in. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this area here. So just underneath the heading. So we're going to push everything else down and we're going to start putting in some code here. Okay, so basically we're going to keep this heading here and actually we might even keep this heading here and then we can push the rest down. So what we might do is let's go in here. Let's go after here. So give yourself some room and let's start by using the div tag. Okay, so I'm going to create a div and just so you can see, I'll just write something in here like hey, and I'll save that. There it is there. Okay, so a div tag on its own is just a block of code that you can put anything inside. Now, what we're going to be doing is actually using a div tag like a container, and inside that container, there are more containers, and you can put things inside those containers and move them around and position them wherever you like. So I'm actually going to get rid of that. Let's open this up. So now I'm inside that first div tag. And what I want to do is I want to call this div tag something. So we're going to assign a class to it. And I'm going to call it a container. You can call it iPhone if you want. You can call it anything you want. But I think if we kind of understand it as a container, you'll understand that what this first div tag is going to do for us. So inside this container, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a row of apps, and inside that row is we're going to have 4 apps. So we're trying to mimic the iPhone. So if I have a look at my iPhone now, I can see that there's a few rows on the home screen and there are 4 apps per row. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another div tag and we're going to assign a class to this. We're going to call it row. And let's close that div tag and let's open it up. Now, inside this div tag, this first row in our iPhone, we obviously want to put in app icons in there. So there's going to be 4 of these. So let's create some more div tags and let's call this, we'll just call them apps or app. And there's our first one. And what I'll do, I'll just write app, the word app in there, just so we can actually see it as well. So I'm just going to copy this div tag. We're going to paste it 4 times. I'll paste it 3 more times. So there's 4 apps inside this row. Okay, so let's have a quick, before we jump on and do more, let's actually just have a quick look at what we've done. We've created a container div, and inside that container div, there's the closing tag for that container div. Inside this container is going to be a div called row, and inside that row are going to be 4 columns or 4 apps that will go inside that. Now, what we might do is just, before we actually have a look at what it looks like, let's jump over to our CSS and let's write some code for these container and the row div tags that we've got. So in my CSS file, I'm going to do .container because that's what the first div is called. And let's just do some basic stuff. So let's just set the width of this container to 300 pixels. Now, why I've chosen 300 pixels, you might be asking, and not something else, because I've got a picture of an iPhone and I've set it to roughly 300 pixels wide and it's about 610 pixels high, something like that. So I'm making the container that big so that it can fit that picture. Now, just so we can actually see it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in a background color, and let's just make it red for now. Okay. Obviously, we're going to put the picture in there later, but just for now, so we can see it, let's do this. All right. Let's drop down. We'll leave container for now, and let's work on the rows. Okay. So I think we called it dot row. So let's do that. Now with the rows, we are not going to specify a pixels, okay? So the row, because it is inside the container, we can now work with percentages. So we can say, hey, we want the row, the width of the row to be 100%. And because the row is inside the container and the container's width is 300 pixels, well, the row is also going to be 300 pixels because we've set it to 100%. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Let's also set the height of this. We'll set it to, let's just go 50 or 60 pixels. We can adjust this later. And let's set a background color for it as well. So let's set it to yellow. Okay, let me zoom out. And what we're going to do is we're going to save the CSS file. Let's go and also save the HTML file. Let's refresh your website and let's see what happens. Okay, there we go. So there is our iPhone. Well, the container for the iPhone. Okay, so if I just go to our CSS real quickly, we set the container to red. So the container is completely red, and we set the row to 100% width. So that's why it's taken up the whole width of the container there. The height is 60 pixels, so it only shows up that much. And the background color is yellow for this particular row. Now, obviously, we're going to get rid of these colors eventually, but it's really good to see the colors, maybe even put a border in so that you can see. Sometimes putting a border, so if I put in a border 1 pixel and I make it solid black, and I'll just copy that real quickly and let's do the same thing here. So if I save that, sometimes it's good to see the border just so you know exactly, yep, I've created the row is working and stuff like that. These things we'll remove later, but it is sometimes really good to do that. You don't have to. We've put the colors in, so that's probably good enough for now. I guess the next thing we'll do before we start creating more rows is to actually fix up our apps. So at the moment, our apps are stacked on top of each other, and there's no definement on the size of them. So we kind of want them to be nice square shapes and spaced out evenly and things like that. So let's just jump over back to our HTML page, our index.html. And here where we've got div class apps and we've written the word app, we need to make sure that we recognize that we've called the class apps. So in our CSS page, let's create a new style. So we're going to go dot apps, and in here let's set the you could go with your apps, you could go with percentages if you want. For example, we could say we want the width of our app to be 25%, and so each app is going to be 25% of the row, because each of these app div tags are in the row. If we set each one to 25%, that means we can fit 4 of those inside. Now we can do it that way. We could also do it a different way where we don't use percentages and we just say, look, it's going to be 50 pixels. So you could say, look, the height is going to be 50 pixels and the width is going to be 50 pixels. Let's set the background color to blue, And let's see if we can see this. So I'm going to save that and let's refresh it. Cool, and there they are. Now, they are stacked on top of each other, and that's something we're going to have to fix using something called a flexible display. So we will look at the way these apps are being displayed, because they should be displayed within the row and not be popping out of the row like it is at the moment. So maybe we'll do that now. And that's probably a good thing before we actually continue on with the rest of the HTML coding to add more rows and apps and things like that. So in our CSS, let's go to our row and let's add a little bit of coding here. So we're going to add in something called a display, and we're going to say flex. So make sure that it is a flexible type of display. We're going to say that the flex direction is in a row, and this should, if we save this, save it and refresh, should put them in a row, and now they are in a row. If I wanted to if I wanted to actually do the direction as a column, which was the default when we kind of had a look at it just before, then it would push them down like that and try and fit it into the row. But we want it to be in a row. So perfect. So let's just save that. There it is there. Now, obviously the spacing, if we have a look at the spacing, you can see that it's all spaced to the left, the top left. Now, obviously what we want to do is center it. So we want these apps to be centered in the middle, and we also want them to be spaced apart as well. So that's something we'll look to do right now as well before we get back into the HTML. So we added a flex direction. Great. Let's now space that stuff out. So we're going to say justify our content, and we're going to do a space. Now there are different types of spaces. There's space around, space between, space evenly. So you guys can kind of suss those out. I kind of went ahead and looked at the completed version, and I found that space evenly is probably going to work best for us. So let's choose that one. I also want to align the items and our text to the center. So I'm going to say align items to center. We'll also do text align center, and let's see how that looks at the moment. So let's save this and let's refresh that. That's actually looking really good. So our apps are spaced out really, really well. They're in the middle of the row, which is perfect, just like an iPhone. And we could probably come back to this, but what we might do is just add in a little bit more of a bit of a margin. So let's do margin bottom, and let's go with something small like 10 pixels. And we might do some margins on the left and right as well. Let's go margin left 5 pixels, just enough to kind of make everything centered and also spaced out evenly within the apps and the rows. So let's save that. Okay, now this is looking pretty good. What we're going to do is jump back over to our index.html, and in our HTML, we've only created one row of apps. So what I want you to do is actually copy the div class row, all of the apps, the div apps, and the ending div that closes that first row. So copy all of that, and what you're going to do is you're going to paste it a couple of times. So let's paste it once there. 2, so that's 3 rows, that's 4 rows, that's 5 rows. I'm not sure how many we'll do. Let's do 6 and 7. We'll probably end up deleting some of these, but let's have a look. Can pull those back if I really want. So you can clean these up if they look a little bit messy, if you don't like it. And it is good to kind of, I mean, it doesn't affect your coding, but it is good visually to see everything in order and see where things are closing and things like that. So I do like to kind of make sure my code looks good. It's easier to read. Okay. Let's just see what it looks like first. So I'm going to save this and refresh this side. Cool. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 there. We could probably add in a couple of more rows. So let's copy that. So I've got 7 all up. We'll probably end up deleting a couple eventually, but let's. Now you'll also notice that my ending tag for the entire container is still here. So make sure that you're creating your rows and your apps inside the rows, and all of that is inside the main container div tag, right? This one here. Okay. If you haven't done that, then it might not work. So cool. We've got plenty of rows of apps. We're probably going to end up deleting a couple of these rows because they might not fit into the iPhone eventually. We'll probably end up with maybe 7 or so, something like that. Okay, let's jump back into our style sheet and let's work a little bit more on the formatting. So let's start with the container itself. So there's probably a lot of stuff that we need to do for this. I'm going to get rid of this border. We will delete it eventually. Might as well just get rid of it now. And let's get rid of the red background color. So we're going to start with actually bringing in the image. So let's go background image, and we need a URL. There we go. And remember, our images are in a folder called images. So there it is. And the image is iphone.png. That's the one there. Perfect. Now let's just see if that has worked. So I'll save this and I'll refresh this, and it is there. We just can't see it because of the yellow. And what I might do is just disable this yellow. I'll just cut it out for now, just so you guys can see what it looks like. So there is my iPhone. Now, when I'm having a look at it, I can see I've probably got too many rows of apps here. There's just too many rows. So I probably need to remove at least one row there. And also you can see my image is repeating, okay? Because our content has gone outside the container and the image stops around here, it's probably about 600 pixels. It is repeating here. So we'll have to fix that as well. Okay. So I'm just going to put the background color yellow back in there. We'll delete it eventually, but let's jump back into our container and do a little bit more. So we've added in a background image. We're now going to say background repeat. So we don't want our background image to repeat, so we're going to say no repeat. There's a couple of other things. We'll want the background image to be centered. So let's go background position, and we're going to center it. We also want to make sure that regardless of the size of our container, so even if we make our container bigger, so our container at the moment is 300 pixels by 650 pixels. But if we decided to make that double, if we decided to make that 600 pixels wide and 1,000 pixels high, we want to make sure that the iPhone image covers the entire container. So what we're going to do, we're going to put in a background size style code, and we're going to make sure that it covers the entire container. So we're going to say cover. All right, let's do a couple of things in terms of positioning. So let's also add in a display flex to this, like we did the row. We'll also make sure that we justify our content, and we're going to make sure that we space everything out evenly. And that'll ensure that the space between the rows are even as well. Okay, so we're going to align our items and we're going to align them to the center. Let's also do a text align as well. So we'll do that to the center. And then to finish things off, we'll do a margin left and we'll set it to automatic, and a margin right and we'll set it to automatic. Now, remember what the margins are doing, and we've used margins before, is going to allow us to put this iPhone into the middle of the page. So if you wanted the iPhone to be on, it's currently it's on the left side of our website. If you wanted it to be on the right side of the website, you could say margin right, 0 pixels, and that would ensure that this is on the right side and things like that. If you wanted it to be, 50 pixels from the right, you could say margin right 50 pixels, and that would put it over on this side and give you a bit of a gap there. But what we're doing is we're setting the margin left and right to automatic, which should push it to the middle. We'll also give the rows a little bit of padding. So the rows that are inside our container, let's just give it a little bit, maybe 10 pixels. So let's save this code. Let's see what it looks like. Oh, we've got an issue. Let's see what is happening. So our iPhone has aligned, which is great. Looks like our rows have busted out of the container. Okay, so let's jump back into our row coding and let's see what is happening here. It could be because our rows are a little bit too wide, so we've set them to 100 pixels. Maybe we can pull that to 80 pixels, 80%, sorry, 80% of the width of the container. So if we set the rows to 80%, then that way they can stay inside the container, so that'll be probably good. Let's just make sure everything else is okay. So the height is 60, background color is yellow. We'll leave it at that. We'll delete this eventually. Let's get rid of the border. We don't need that anymore. Display flex, cool, flex direction as a row. We've just defined our content. Okay, that's all good. Let's just double check our apps code as well now. So with our apps code, I think that's probably the only thing we need at the moment. So let's see if that width 80% has fixed things for us. Okay. Still in trouble. Okay, let's see what's going on. Okay, I think it's because yeah. So with the rows, we said to display as flex, and we also added a flex direction. With the container, we didn't specify a flex direction. So let's do that. Let's go flex direction, and we want the rows to be in columns, so not in rows. So currently, if you have a look, they're in a row, the rows. The rows of apps are in a row, but we want them to be stacked on top of each other. So our flex direction for the container is going to be a column. Now let's see if that is going to fix it. Perfect. All right, excellent. Cool, so things are looking good. Now, we've got too many rows of apps, so we're probably going to delete at least one row. So let's head over to our index.html. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows. Let's get rid of the last one. So I'm just going to remove this last row. Let's save that and refresh this. That's looking better. I kind of feel like the apps are a little bit squashed in. Maybe they can be a little bit wider. So the rows, so if we go back to our CSS, we could probably play around with the width of the rows. So maybe making that 90%. Let's see what that looks like. Looks a little bit better. I think that's pretty good. Okay, so one of the things that we want to do, and if you have an iPhone, you could probably have a look. When you are in your home screen, typically you don't have rows and rows and rows of apps. You've got the last row of apps is your main apps, and then just above it, you have a search button. So there's a bit of a gap between the second last row and the last row. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go over to our index.html page, so our HTML page, and we're going to go to the second last row. So that's this one here. And we're going to get rid of 3 of the apps. So we're going to delete those 3. So this row will only have 1 app in it. So let's save that and refresh it, see what it looks like. There it is, it's centered. Now, just for now, what we're going to do is just put in the word search. And if you have a look at your actual iPhone, you'll see there's like a little picture icon and stuff like that. And we can look to do that later on. So there it is there, search. What I'll also do is, what we might do is we'll change this class from row, because we might tweak it a little bit. We might change it to row and we'll call it dash search. Now, because we've changed the class for this last row in our HTML, what we'll have to do is also create a new, and I might just copy this and paste it in there, and we'll call it row search. Now, we can leave pretty much everything else. What we might do is just make it a different color, just so we know that it's working. This is looking all good. And that way, because we've made this second last row its own style in the style sheet, we have full control over doing something different with these buttons and stuff like that. So we'll come back to that later on. We might even make a separate .app in here too. So let's do that, and we'll come back to that. So .apps search button or something like that, search. And let's give this a different color as well. Let's make it green just so we know it's working. We'll go back to our index.html, and this part here with the search in the div tag, that's called apps. Let's just change that class to apps.search. Okay, let's save that. Let's have a look. It has changed. We'll come back to that at a later point. Okay, we'll come back to that at a later point. So what do we need to do now? If I have a look at my iPhone's got a few apps on there. It's got a main app as well. So down here, we've actually got 4 apps that are the main apps, and they have a really cool transparent background as well, which we'll look to we'll look to do that now. So this last div in our HTML coding, we're also going to change the class. So we're going to call it row dash, let's call it main apps. And that's probably it. Let's go over to our CSS now, and we're going to copy the row CSS, and let's paste it down here, and let's call it row dash main apps. Now, on my iPhone, it's a particular color, but it kind of matches with the background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a dark blue as the color. So let's have a look, make sure that's working. Yep, there it is, dark blue. Now, you'll also notice if you do have an iPhone that the corners are rounded. Now, we can do that by adding in a border radius. So in our row.mainApps, let's add in one more line of code, and let's add in border radius, and you can add a percentage if you want, or pixels. I might just do, let's do 30 pixels, and let's save that. Let's see what that looks like if I refresh this. Oh, that's probably a little bit too rounded. Let's go to maybe 20 or 25 pixels. You guys can test that out, maybe 20. Have a look at your iPhone, decide what looks best. That looks pretty good there. Now the other thing is with the background, it is rounded, but it's also transparent, a little bit transparent or translucent. So this row.main apps, we've got a background color, but we want to make it a little bit transparent. So I'm going to put in a 0.5 after the color, and let's save this and refresh it. Oh, it's gone. Okay, so let's jump into W3 schools, transparent background color. Okay, let's have a look. Oh, opacity. Okay, let's give that a go. So let's go with, oh, actually that might be the opacity for the whole thing. How do we do background color opacity? Okay, so we need the RGBA code for dark blue. So let's do that. RGB code is 00139. So you can see that when I hover over the color, the RGB color code comes up at the top. So it's 00139. So what we're going to do, we're going to get rid of this code that, oh, okay. So it's not background color, it is just background. Perfect. So that should fix it all up. So we're specifying the background for this. Okay, there we go. All right, so a little bit of troubleshooting and we have got it. So the code is pretty much the same. I think Visual Studio was just messing up a little bit. So let's put our code back in 00, I think it was 137, something like that. And there it is. Now I kind of like the gray one, so maybe we pull that back. So 137, 137. Yeah, that looks pretty good to me. I'm happy with that. And that looks pretty good to me. So that last row looks good. That search button looks really good. Our rows of apps looks really good as well. What we now want to do is actually get rid of all the colors and actually start putting app icons in there. So let's jump over to our index.html. What we're going to do in here is we're going to get rid of the word app. And what we're going to replace it with is an image. So we're going to bring in the image tag and we're going to do a search for an image and our images folder. And let's just bring in app1. Now at the end of that, we're going to close off this image tag and let's actually, before we copy it, we need to do a couple of things. For example, how big is this image? So let's set a width to 40 pixels, and we can always come back and adjust that at a later point in time. Let's copy that and let's replace that first row. Let's save this and let's see what it looks like. And there is our first row of apps in there, which is looking pretty good. So that is the code right there for it. Cool. Now, if you wanted to create your own apps, in the folder, I've got app icons. So I've got app 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. If you wanted to create your own, what I would do is hit open with Photoshop. I would go and download my own image from the internet, or design it yourself if you really wanted to, and bring that into this already sized one that I've created. And it is really, really important. I'll just zoom in here and show you guys. It's really important that when you do bring an image in, that you make sure that you've got the round corners. Okay, so if you bring an image in and it fills the entire screen, for example, like this, then you want to make sure that you've rounded the corners off. And if you do round the corners, what you want to do is also save it. So save a copy, and you want to make sure that it is a PNG when you save it. And you also want to make sure that you have interlacing on. That will make sure that it loads quickly on your website, but also it supports transparency. So these parts here, if you save it as something like a JPEG or something like that, you'll find that those images are not going to be transparent on the corners. And when you bring it into your app or your website, you're going to have more of a box look. Okay, great. Now, obviously, you guys can do your own apps, but I'm just going to stick with this one, and I'm going to replace all of my words that say app, and I'm going to replace it with the code for the image. Now, this last row of apps, I am going to change it. So I'll actually, let's use different apps. So let's use app 2, app 3, app 4, and app 5. I'm not sure which ones these are, but I know we've got about 8 different apps in there. So let's save this and refresh it, and let's have a look at what it looks like. Cool. So we've got some apps down here. We've got all the Waze apps in there. Now let's get rid of the background colors. Okay, so let's jump into the style sheet. We were only using background colors so that we could actually see the div blocks, the div containers. So now that we know that they're set up exactly how we want them, we can get rid of all these background colors. So get rid of that. We can even get rid of the row, the search row. Excellent. We'll leave that last one because that one's got to be a translucent, just like the iPhone has. So let's save this and let's refresh our page. All right, that's what it's looking like at the moment. So that's looking pretty good. We probably can increase the size of our images. And also this text here, this search text, we probably want to make that white. So let's do both of those things. Let's jump back over to our index page, and we might do the search, the word search. So on the other side of the search, I'm just going to put a P tag and put the word search inside the P tag. So that's our paragraph tag. Now with the P tag, that is a tag for paragraphs, but what we can do is assign a class to it. So I'm going to assign a class and I'm going to call it the search text. Now, the text on our website is white and black and things like that. Now, this search text, it's coming up black on our iPhone. So what we're going to do is go over to our style sheet and we'll just quickly make a style guide for it. So we'll call it, so we called it class dot search text, and all we want to do is change the color. So we're going to make the color, let's make it white. Let's save that and also save our HTML page and refresh this. And there it is there. Now that's quite large. We probably don't want it to be that large. So let's change the font size, and let's make it 10 pixels. We'll judge it once we see it. So let's save that and save that, refresh. That looks a little bit small. We might make it 20 pixels. Let's have a look. It's a bit too big. Yeah, probably 15 pixels, the sweet spot. We'll come back to that search icon later on. Okay. We want to also increase the size of our app icons. So unfortunately, we got to do it on all of them, but we did set the width to 40. Now let's make that 50, and let's just adjust the first row to see what it looks like. Yeah, that definitely looks way better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to adjust the size of the picture to 50. I think the width of the app divs are 60 pixels. So you could probably go up to about 60, but I think 50 at the moment is looking pretty good. We don't have to specify a height because it will just go and look at the ratios. So we put in 50 pixels in for all of these. And it is trial and error, guys. You just need to go through and experiment, and you might like it a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller, so you guys can offset it the way you want. So let's save that page and refresh. That's looking so much better. That looks really, really good. I might put a little bit of a gap from the top there, but that's pretty much looking fantastic at the moment. Okay, there is still a couple of things I want to show you guys. So first of all is we're going to get a little bit of an animation on the rollover states for our apps. We also want to make sure that if you click on one of these apps that it takes you somewhere. So for example, if you click on maybe this Google Apps icon over here, it takes you to Google Maps. So let me show you how to do that. And then you guys, if you want to put your own apps in there and link them to different things, you can definitely do that. So what we'll do is we'll come down here and we're going to maybe link this one. And that way you guys can kind of copy that code and put it on all of them. Okay, so this one here is in the last row. It's the second app, this Google Maps app. It's the second last one. So you can do it on whichever one you want. So I'm just jumping straight to that one. So this is it here, and I'll just open this up just so you guys can kind of see. So this is the one we're talking about. Okay, that's the second last app. Okay, it's called app3.png. Now I want to make this picture a link to Google Maps. So I'm going to go to just before the image tag, and I'm going to add in an A tag, a hyperlink reference, and we're going to go to a website, www.google.com. Now I'm not sure what, I think it might be maps.google.com. Let's double check. It is maps.google.com. Okay, so let's jump in here and do that. Maps.google.com. Okay, now I've got the A link, and you guys will probably recall when we do links, we want to set a target, and we want the target to be blank. So what that will make sure that when you click on the app icon, it opens in a new page. So let's close that A tag. So that's at my opening A tag, and that's closed off now. Oh, actually I closed it on the wrong side. There we go. Now, if I go over, it's put the closing A tag right here, but I don't want the closing A tag there, right? Because I want the hyperlink to be this image. Whatever is inside the A tag is going to be hyperlinked. So this is where I want the end of the A tag to be, after the image code. So let's save this, and let me refresh this page. And now you can actually see when I move my mouse over, it is a link because my cursor changes. So let's make sure that opens in a new tab now, and I click on it and it does open Google Maps on a new page. So you can use that code and code up all of your app links if you want to different websites or even different sections of your web page, and you'll learn that later on in this tutorial when we start to do hyperlinks and things like that within your website. Okay, great. We're going to look at the transform CSS code now to be able to animate your apps. Okay, so we just added an increase in the padding. Another thing you could do is change the margin bottom to 5 pixels and add in a margin top 5 pixels if you wanted a little bit of more of a gap on the top of your rows. Okay, so we're going to add in a rollover effect onto our apps. So before we start anything, we need to create a class for our app icons. We might just do it on the last row, but if you wanted to do it on all of your rows, you just need to add in a class on the image tag. So here is our image tag here, and this is the last row I'm looking at. So the last 4 apps, there's the first app in the last row, second app, third app, and fourth app. And I'm just going into the image tag here where it says search, etc., and the width and all that. And just before we close it off, we're going to add in a class equals, and we'll just call it zoom. Okay, so it's like a zoom effect. And I'm going to copy that class, and I'm going to add it into these 4 images. Now, again, if you wanted it to be on all of the apps in the iPhone and not just the ones in the last row, then go in and copy that class and copy it to every single one. We will also have, if you wanted it so that, the image of the Apple logo and stuff like that, then you could also add that class into that too. Okay, cool. So let's save this and let's do some CSS coding for that. So let's scroll down, and the class we called was zoom. So we're going to go .zoom. Now, we don't want this effect to happen all the time. We only want this effect to happen when we move the mouse over the object or the picture. So we're going to say, we're going to do a colon, and we're going to say that we want it to do it on hover. Okay, so let's open that up, and now let's add in our code. Now, the code we want is MS, so it is a transform tool. Now, this is new code. It's only been around for a few years. So this is a transform tool. It allows you to do some really cool animations and stuff like that. And what we're doing is we're going to be scaling our image, and we're going to scale it up by 1.5. So we'll also do a couple other things. So we want to use a WebKit so that there's support for this transform tool that we're using. So let's also use that. That'll make sure that the transform is smooth and it scales up nicely, and it doesn't just instantly become 1.5 times bigger when you move your mouse over it. We're going to add in a transform scale, and let's do 1.2 for this. And also let's add in a transition effect to make sure that it is smooth, and we're going to say the transform should take 0.2 seconds. If you wanted the transition to be slower, you could obviously increase that or decrease that depending on if you liked it or not. So let's have a look and see if that looks good. So let's save this. Make sure that both your HTML and CSS is saved. Let's refresh this page, and there is a really cool animation. Fantastic. And I think our link should still work. So let's have a look. Yes, it does. And that's great. So you could add this onto, and you can play around with these numbers with scaling and things like that if you wanted to do different. And you could add this onto all of your app icons. Now, your CSS code is done. Okay, it is finished. Your class is called Zoom. So if you wanted to add it into more pictures, then you just need to go over and write class equals Zoom on anything that is an image that you'd like to scale up. You can definitely do that. So if you wanted to go through all your divs and add them into every single one, you can just go in there and copy that and paste that in there. So I can easily do that now. I might even put the zoom effect on our logo that we're going to be doing when we build our navigation bar, and that'll be in the next tutorial. So let's have a look. We'll save this and refresh that, and now we've got all of the app icons actually moving around, and it looks fantastic. It really does. Okay, guys, that is all for today. Basically, what I'd like you to do is customize your app icons and create your iPhone the way you want to. It's completely up to you how you want to do it. And if you're brave enough, you could even look at, instead of creating rows, you could create columns and rows that are larger than what we've set, and maybe put in widgets like the iPhone does now. Now, if you were going to do something like that, you would need to go into your divs and kind of sort that out, remove some of your divs. You'll probably have to create your own classes as well, like we did when we were modifying what the bottom row would look like and the second last row and stuff like that. Anyways, next tutorial, we're going to be looking at a navigation bar. So we're going to set up a navigation bar up the top, a logo on the left side with buttons here on the right side. And when you click on those buttons, it will take you to different sections within your website. So I'll see you guys then.